Welcome to the Wednesday evening Alcoholism Addiction Education Program, sponsored jointly by the Colmack Clinic, the Shepherd Pratt Hospital, and the National Council for Alcoholism and Drug Dependence of Maryland. And before I begin, I may switch glasses. My eye doctor wants me to try these out, see if they work better with this and that. So if I switch, it's because I can't see. Tonight's topic can be summarized in a single sentence. Alcoholism is a family illness. Now that sentence could mean one of two things. The first thing it could mean would be that alcoholism runs in families, drug addiction runs in families, and it does. That we've known for quite some time. What we haven't known is why. Why does it run in families? And there are two answers to that question, depending on who's doing the answering. And the first is that if you live with alcoholics, you will imitate them, and you will drink just the way they do. So you will learn alcohol. It's a learning theory. You will learn alcoholism from your parents, your uncles, your siblings. Whenever I hear that proposed as the answer to the question, I always think to myself, if you grow up in an alcoholic family, it is more likely that you will learn how not to be an alcoholic because it's a painful place to live in. So I'm not sure that the learning would be positive. I think the learning might be negative, in fact. The other reason that it could run in families is for genetic reasons. Not that we inherit alcoholism, the full-blown disease, but that we inherit a proneness to alcoholism. And what it will depend on is whether or not we drink, and then, of course, to some extent, how much and how often. That kind of thinking, the genetic notion, is supported by some good hard data, as a matter of fact. Adoption and twin studies specifically. In adoption studies, what they do is they go find themselves a whole bunch of kids who were separated from their parents at birth. So they eliminate any kind of learning possibility. You don't know your parents. You were separated at birth. Okay? Then they, through interview and investigation, they try to figure out how many of you had a family history positive. In other words, in your bloodline there is an alcoholic drug addict. Okay? And how many of you are negative. So they match you in every way possible except that one. Family history positive here, family history negative here. They grow up. Then they start counting how many alcoholics are in each group. Okay? And in the family history negative group, let's say you're it, what they find is there's X number of alcoholics. Okay? There are still people who you can't trace a genetic history of addiction, and yet you find it in how many? X number. When they look, however, at the family history positive group, what they find is the percentage is 4X. So for every 1, there are 4. For every 100, there are 400. For every 1,000, there are 4,000. Well, that kind of leap doesn't happen accidentally. Statisticians don't say, whoops, that says genetic factors must play a role in this disease because we've matched them in every way we can, all right? Background and race, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we still find in this kind of study, the genetic studies have been replicated 9, 10, 11 times. The number of addicts does not correlate with which kind of family you were raised in. So if you're family history negative, didn't have parents, and are raised in an adoptive family that's positive for, so you escape the parent alcoholism, but by God, you got thrown into a household in which your adoptive parents are alcoholic. Guess what? Your risk factor doesn't increase. So it doesn't matter who raised you. It doesn't matter who bought your genes. It matters whose genes you're wearing. The genetic factors play a role. A few years ago, the Committee on the Genetics of Alcoholism stopped asking the question, do genetic factors play a role? They've abandoned that as a question. Their new question is, which genetic factors play a role? So, they've said we know it's genetics plays some kind of a role in this thing. We're just not sure which one it is. The other kinds of studies are twin studies. God has gifted researchers with two kinds of twins. Monozygotic, in other words, two people are born of a single egg. Consequently, they share identical genetic material. So they both have blue eyes, they both have blonde hair, they're both right-handed and shy. All right? And the other are dizygotic, two eggs, two different sets of genes. So they were born at the same time, but one came out a boy and the other one came out a girl. But one has brown hair and the other has blonde hair. One's, as an adult, 6 foot tall and the other's 5'10". Well, it would make sense that if genetic factors play a role, in which of those two groups would you find it more likely twin-to-twin alcoholism? That if one has it, so does the other. Pretty obvious, it's the identical pairs, right? What does the data tell us? That's logic, but what's the data tell us? Here's what it tells us. It tells us that in the not look-alike pairs, it happens 28% of the time. If one is, so is the other. It's about the same rate for all brothers and sisters. When they look at the monozygotic, one egg, identical genes, the percentage doubles. It's 56%. So it tells us a couple of things. One is genetic factors play a role. The other is must not be the whole story. Because if it were the whole story, then we'd have a higher percentage, I think, than 56. So there've got to be additional factors. The Committee on the Genetics of Alcoholism isn't studying whether, it's studying which, okay? And quite frankly, I don't know of anyone in the country today who is seriously investigating the so-called alcoholic personality. The reason is because, about 40 years ago, a guy named George Valiant, Harvard University professor, wrote a book summarizing 4 decades of tracking these people and concluded that the so-called alcoholic personality wasn't the cause of alcoholism, it was the result of alcoholism. Which makes a lot more sense, that if you poison your brain and do so for 10, 15, or 20 years, if you piss off your friends, if your emotional life is exaggerated and distorted and blunted, you're likely to change over 10 or 15 years. And go 20 and 30 years, you probably change even more. So yeah, I don't like to use the phrase addictive personality. I prefer the personality of addiction because it more focuses not on a causative factor, but a resultant factor. So yeah, people change when they drink for that much for that long. The other meaning of alcoholism, drug addiction, is a family illness, is this, that people who live with alcoholics and drug addicts get sick too. They get sometimes as sick, sometimes they get even sicker emotionally than the addict himself. Now, I hate to say that. People hardly are pleased. They come to the lecture for the first time and someone says, "You're sick." And I know that no one's ever gotten well by being told that they are sick. But I also know this, that people who aren't sick will hardly ever get well. The first step to recovering from anything is as true for the family as it is for the addict. The first step is to acknowledge that you have something to get well from. Otherwise, why make any effort to recover if you don't think you have anything to recover from? And now, when I say that today, I realize that, my God, that's a natural conclusion to a perfectly unnatural situation. It's hard to imagine that anyone could escape being affected by addiction if they live with it for a long time. If you were living with, even for a short time, if you were living with someone who had a psychiatric illness, you'd be affected by the experience of living with such a person, even if it were only for several months. If you live with someone who has a degenerative physical ailment, like cancer, you'd be affected by the experience. You would have trouble sleeping. You would feel anger and guilt and shame and all those kinds of things. You'd hope for some kind of a miraculous cure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when you look at the factors that are impacting a family that lives with an alcoholic drug addict, you can imagine first of all, how multiple they are and how each one is rather intense. I call it the mathematics of the family illness. It sort of goes like this. The first thing you live with is you live with symptoms. What kind? Geez, all kind. So you live with these symptoms. You live with drunkenness. That's scary sometimes. It's funny sometimes. It's unpredictable as hell most of the time. You live with anger and you live with fear. You live with guilt. You lose sleep. You may have been abused. If you have been, no one who works in this field would have been surprised by that. You live with paranoia and hallucination. In other words, you live with something that, for all the world, looks like mental illness. You live with depression and anxiety and impulsivity and broken promises and moodiness and you name it. Just the list goes on and on and on and on. And you unlike the cancer patient or the mentally ill patient, you will live with this for a long time. Live with someone mentally ill for 6 weeks, you'll be affected by the experience. Live with a dying cancer patient for 6 months, you'll really be affected by that experience. So how long might you live with an addict? My God, it could be 10 years. It could be 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Hell, I've seen 35. You live with someone who is sick and you do that for a long time, it's almost inescapable that the experience will affect you. And if you haven't been affected by it, I want to meet you, all right? Because I've never met a saint. I'm really curious about what one looks like. You also experience a load of guilt and damage to self-esteem. See, an addict can't acknowledge that he's sick. And if he can't acknowledge that, he can't acknowledge it because it'll mean he'll have to do something about his drinking and drugging. He doesn't want to do that. So if he doesn't blame himself, guess who gets blamed? You do. You do. And the problem with that is not only is it relentless, right? If you were a better mother, wife, made spaghetti, spoke French, went out with me, okay? Raised the children better, all right? So not only is it relentless, it's coming from a trusted source. If I'm your spouse, you've told me your secrets. Got it? So I know you. And if I got the disease of addiction, I'm going to be especially hurtful to you because you trust me. You've trusted me. That's tough on the ego. That's tough on self-esteem. I wish I had a nickel for every family member who has been at the library trying to find a book on how they went wrong and what to do about it. You accept the blame for addiction. What did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? Why can't I see this? Why couldn't I see it? Parents often believe they have caused a son or daughter's addiction. Where did we go wrong? Was it giving him too much freedom or too little freedom? Should we have limited his friends or her friends? Should we have let him play football or not play football? And that goes round and round and round. If you're a parent, you have a son or a daughter who's addicted, let go of the notion that you could have caused it. It's impossible for you to have caused it. All right? Unless you can prove to me that you can cause my brain to change because of your behavior, then I might start believing that you have the power to cause addiction. But I know this. One, you cannot make my brain tolerant of a drug. You might be as mean as the Wicked Witch of the West, all right? But you can't make me tolerate heavier and heavier doses of alcohol or heroin or whatever the hell the drug is. You don't have the power to do that. And that's a critical piece of the diagnosis. Without tolerance, you don't have addiction. You may have troublesome drinking, but you don't have addiction. It's one of the big three, and it ain't there. It's not there. The other criteria is a pattern of loss of control. And you can't do that either. You can't make me lose control. Dr. Mark Shuckett from California does some interesting studies in which he recognizes that, if your family history is positive, that problem, the fact that you can't take just one or two drinks and stop, but that once you take the first one, is under not mental control, but biochemical control. Because family history positives have that problem, okay? And you can't make me, I don't think you can make me persist despite problems. So if you think you've caused addiction, you can't cause those three things, and those three things are necessary for the problem. So let go of that notion. You can't do it. You can't do it anyway. Sometimes families feel as guilty about their own anger, sometimes that reaches rage proportions. So you talk to family members over a period of time, and they'll tell you, if they trust you, that they are terribly ashamed of how much anger they feel, how much rage they feel. So, and if you recognize that it's a disease, you can still feel angry about it. Had enough? Do you think you can escape being affected by this? We're not halfway there. We got anger first. Anger. If you can live, again, I'd like to meet you too. If you can live with an addict and not have experienced anger, you've got to be a saint. I'd like to meet you. Please introduce yourself at the break, okay? Besides that, anger isn't right or wrong. Anger, as a matter of fact, can be very useful, in fact. How many of you recognize that in your lives that anger has been part of what has motivated you to get off your ass and go do something? It's a great motivator, anger, all right? So we get to thinking that somehow it's wrong or bad or wicked or evil. It's not. It depends on what you do with the anger. That can be good or bad, right or wrong. But having it is nothing more than having it. Let's see what you do with it next. So, it comes from four sources. When I talk to people about their anger, I hear them say repeatedly these couple of things. First, I was angry because I was hurt. I was angry because I was hurt. Either hurt physically or psychologically. So if I step on your toe, you're likely to be angry. In fact, if you aren't angry about that, we have a bed for you across the street. You should be angry about that. What you do with the anger is another question, but feeling the emotion is a perfectly normal response to that kind of situation. If I question your choice of clothes, for instance, where did you get that tie? You'll get angry too, because you've taken a shot at your ego, all right? So those are normal situations in which people feel anger. What you do with that then will depend on a lot of factors, but hurt is one of those sources. So it's pretty much about either your toes or your ego. Frustration. How many of you rode the Beltway this evening? Did you get pissed off? I'll bet you did. You know, I call it Baltimore's circular parking lot. Of course you get angry at frustration. It's based on, frustration isn't a feeling. Frustration is a word that describes that you either feel that you are or are actually blocked from getting something that you want or you need. I want to get to Shepherd Pratt by 7 p.m. and there's traffic a mile long, and I get angry. Perfectly normal. You don't have to get angry. You could get sad. You could get depressed. You could say, oh, shit, there it goes again. I'm blocked from what I want or need. Okay? So hurt is one of those. Frustration is another. And again, you can be either angry or not, and you can respond to that in one way or not. This happens to normal people under normal circumstances, and it's broken trust. If you and I make a pact, make a promise that I'm going to do A, and when I do A, you're going to do B, we've made a trust pact. If you don't do B, I'm going to be angry at you because I trusted you and you violated the trust. All right. Now, in addiction, what's the most significant trust pact we know? Most of you have probably done it. It's called marriage, right? And when you made that pact, you promised to love and honor and obey, and you promised never to drink yourself to death. Trust, broken trust, is one of the damaging things that happens to family members because they stop trusting after that. And when you stop trusting, you can't have a relationship with anyone because any true friendship, any true connection, any true relationship is based on trust, right? You are predictable. I know what you'll do. I can tell when you say A, you're going to do A. So you grow up in an environment in which trust is broken, you're going to find it very difficult to have relationships with anybody, at least for a while. Now, that'll happen if you're alive in the 21st century in the United States of America. But if you're living with an addict, multiply it by 5. You just get a lot more opportunities to be hurt, frustrated, and to have trust broken. So you're not just experiencing what most people are experiencing. You're living with an addict, so you multiply it by a factor of 3 or 4 or 5. The next one's miscommunication. That I will be angry if you and I say, meet you at the shopping center at 8. You're there at 8 a.m. and I'm there at 8 p.m. We're both angry at each other, all right? Because we just didn't connect, all right? That's not as often the case when we're talking about addiction, but it is one of the cases. The other thing that I see and hear all the time is that sometimes that people will not want to recognize their anger. They want to deny it. Now, I think the reason is because how many of you recognize that in some fairly subtle ways when you were growing up, what was communicated to you was, don't be angry? How many of you recognize that that message came through? Don't be angry. Don't be angry. Or if you're going to be angry, go outside. So it expresses itself in many ways, but we grow up with this notion that somehow it's a bad thing to be angry. Women, you're not permitted to be angry. Men, we can, can't we? What can't we do? What emotion can't we do? We can't do fear. You can do fear, all right? Because it makes us feel strong. But you can't do anger, because if you do anger, we'll call you a bitch. We'll call you a bitch, And it sends a message, doesn't it? But the problem is that anger isn't good or bad. It's just anger, all right? Unfortunately, if you live with addicts, you have no real models for how to deal with anger. Alcoholics and drug addicts know only two things to do with their anger. You know what they are, don't you? Stuff it or blow it. Stuff it. Are you angry? No. Or blow it. Angry! Murderously angry. Alcoholics, when they get sober, need to be taught about their feelings, and that feelings are normal things and that they have appropriate and inappropriate responses. But you're never going to deal with it unless you first acknowledge that you have it. No one ever deals with anger if they're not angry. I remember working with a patient in a group, now I call her Helen, and Helen's interactions in the group were almost invariably sharp, sarcastic, biting. At one point, one of the other patients in the group said, God, Helen, you're so angry. And she said, no, I'm not. I'm not angry. I thought for a moment, I was wondering, I wonder when's the last time Helen recognized that she was actually angry. So I asked her the question, do you remember the last time you really felt angry? She told a story to the group. She said, I was drinking, of course, and I was raising a 16-year-old daughter by myself. I had a new boyfriend coming over for dinner. So I said to my daughter, please don't leave the bathroom messed up. Be sure that you clean it up and wash the shower down and throw the towels in the laundry basket. What impact do you suppose that has on a 16-year-old girl who's going out for the third time? Zero. So guess what? The bathroom was a soap scum all over the place, towels, clothes everywhere. The mother walked into the bathroom, picked up a towel, and she meant to put it in the shower. Unfortunately, the door was closed. So when she grabbed the towel, she put her hand right through the shower door, glass door. All she remembers of the evening was blood and glass and what she called anger at the time. I was so pissed off at her. So when you ask her 10 years later, are you angry? She equates anger with what? Blood and glass and bathrooms, all right? Anything that doesn't reach that level, that ain't anger. That's not anger. I think the best thing to do with anger is not to give yourself an excuse to call it anything but anger. I'm angry. Big deal. I don't have to rip your head off. I'm angry. And now I might be able to deal with it appropriately. So, there are no models for dealing with it. And it's useful. Fear. If you live with addicts, you'll know fear. Fear of what? Fear of abuse, abandonment, death. So you live with those kinds of fears. The fear that you will be abused, physically abused, if not emotionally. Call the House of Ruth tonight and ask them how many of their clients are there because they live with an addict. And don't be surprised if the answer is all of them. All of our clients are here because of their youth. Be surprised if they say 70%. Rarely below 70%. So you live with the fear of abuse. And guess what? If your self-esteem has already been damaged, the fear of abandonment is even scarier because you think that, living with an addict's bad enough, but living without one may be even worse. I'm not sure I have the tools to do life on my own. And there are some people who have stuck in an addictive marriage way longer than they had any right to do so, because of the fear that if you're abandoned, you don't have the stuff for life. You don't have the means. You don't know how to do life. I worked with a kid. It started with this kid, and I asked him, "What's going on with you? Why are your grades in the D range? Because I know you're bright. I taught your father. I know how bright he is." And he said, "Well, that's the reason I'm having trouble." "What's that?" He said, "My father's an alcoholic." I said, "Oh, I'm not surprised." I said, "Why don't you tell him to come in and see me? I can at least direct him for where to go to get some help if he wants help." "Oh, he won't come see you." I said, "Well, tell your mother to come see me." "Would you see her?" I said, "Sure. I won't counsel her, but I can point her in the direction where she can get some help for this, and I will do that for her." And she showed up. She showed up the next day. And I told her that it sounds for all the world. You need to get an assessment. You don't need to go flying off assuming that you've got alcoholism. She looked at me with a smirk that would have killed you. She knew it was alcoholism. But I wasn't going to diagnose him on the first trip without any information. So get an assessment. And she was a woman who was 3 credits or 3 courses, I've forgotten. She was 3 credits or courses shy of a bachelor's degree. She fell in love with this guy. He was brilliant. He was a chemical engineer. He got a job right fresh out of college making bucks, all right? And he took off for California. And guess what? She quit school and took off after him. And they got married. And she was fine as long as his alcoholism hadn't reached the level that it finally had reached. But she was afraid that I have no skills. I have nothing to sell the world. I told her, get the damn 3 credits. She said, how? Go to school. That's how you get those 3 credits. You go to school, you put your ass in a chair, and you pass some tests. It's no goddamn secret. But she nearly got stuck in that marriage for fear of her own independence, for fear that she couldn't quite do it. So those are, and then of course fear of death. Whose? His or yours? His or yours? I would imagine there are a few too many people who are dead because of a rageful alcoholic argument, when a gun was present or whatever. So it's tough to live with those kinds of fears. And so what do you want to do? You want to control. That's pretty much, isn't that what control is all about? I want to control the world, because if I control the world, if I can control A, B, C, or D, I won't have to be scared. I won't have to be afraid of abuse or abandonment or death. I can keep those things from happening. In fact, whenever I worked with patients, I would, who are afraid, that was my first question. Okay? What is it that you want to control? I say, huh? I said, you must want to control something that you're having trouble realizing that you can't control it. So what is that you want to control? We'll talk about that in a little while, because that's really key to understanding this disease. You're trying to avoid an impending loss. You're trying to avoid abuse, abandonment, death. You're trying to avoid, what are our fears? What are the things we're afraid we're going to... Fear's always looking to the future and seeing loss coming our way and feeling we can't do a damn thing about it. Okay? So we fear the loss of freedom. That's the loss that you fear. That's a fear that you feel when you think you're going to be arrested, okay? Because you've broken the law. And the way to avoid that is don't break the law. No secret, no secret. We do not live in a country in which you can be dragged out of your bed and imprisoned. We fear the loss of security, emotional security. That's why a man will kidnap his girlfriend and hold her hostage and threaten to kill her, because he's afraid that losing that support is devastating and that he can't do it without it. We see that, you see it on the news, right? A bunch of times. You're afraid of the loss of life, so you're afraid of being killed. And the way to avoid that is don't put yourself in situations where people carry guns. Just don't go there. Don't do that. Otherwise, that's about as much as you can do, is to stay in safe places and act in safe ways. All right? But no one can write you a promise that you'll never be in that situation. How many of you have ever been in a situation in which you were afraid you would lose your life? Soldiers, put your hands down. No goddamn well they have fear. All right? Otherwise, those aren't common fears. You know, one of the biggest fears, it's the fear that... How many of you would be afraid if I asked you to come up on the stage and finish the lecture? Raise your hands. Shit, I'm afraid standing up here, so I know you would be. All right? Why? Because that's not the fear of the loss of life. We have never seen anyone drop dead up here. All right? Doesn't happen. It's the fear that you feel when you're afraid you're going to embarrass yourself. Okay? It's a fear of the loss of ego, image. A great many of our fears, when you think about it, are fears that you're going to lose your reputation, good name, image, ego, etc. Now, the reason we have such powerful feelings about embarrassment is because the language that we think in is scary language, right? Think of how we talk about embarrassment. We say things like, I was mortified. Now, you know the word mortified, you know what it literally means? I was made dead. It's from the Latin word that means to be made dead, mortified, okay? She was so embarrassed she could have crawled into a hole is a grave metaphor, right? He was embarrassed to death. I've never seen anyone embarrassed to death. Somebody walk into an AA meeting and say, my name's Sam and I'm an alcoholic, and drop dead. What happened? Well, he died. Why? Because he embarrassed himself. If the bastard had only kept his mouth shut, he'd be alive today. Doesn't happen. But the fear of embarrassment is an ego-based fear. And it sometimes runs our lives, okay? So those kinds of fears are really powerful and potent and scary as hell. Next is enabling. You don't cause alcoholism. What you can do is you can enable it to continue. All right? You can't make me tolerate booze, lose control, and persist despite the fact that I've lost my right arm. all right? But you can help me continue. And you do that in a number of different ways. And the motives for doing it are love. I rescue you from the consequences of your drinking by bailing you out because I love you. I don't want you to be embarrassed. I enable you to continue because I hope it will work. So I'm going to deny, cover up, and nag you so that you stop drinking. And yet, all of those backfire on me. But they're still driven by very understandable forces. The reason that I rescue you is because I hope it'll work. It hasn't worked 300 times, but maybe the 301st time it'll work. I'm going to lend you money because I hope that works. So I've already loaned you $6,000, but I think it's the next dollar that's going to hit you, and you will stop drinking and live happily ever after. I enable you because I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't enable you. So it is better to enable you with the hope that, and the fear of, that if I don't rescue you, you're going to lose your job. Okay? And I enable you sometimes because I gain from enabling you. I knew a woman who enabled her husband, not deliberately, not consciously, all right? She didn't want him to keep drinking, but she enabled him in a number of different ways. Calling the boss, John's under the weather. Under the weather my ass. John's shit-faced. All right? But, of course, we enabled John by saying he's sick or whatever. All right? When you dug into this a little bit, what you found is that the more she enabled, the more he drank, the more she got praise from her children. So she was the good parent. And it was hard to let go of that. You know, the kids loved her. She felt more powerful that way. And to let go of some of that sense of power, that sense of worship from the kids, was a difficult thing to do. So enabling isn't conscious, it's hardly ever deliberate. People don't think that that's what they're doing when they're doing it. And yet it does keep the addiction rolling. So if family really can't let go of enabling, can let go of it only when the feelings that drive it are cared for. You're not going to stop enabling as long as you think it's the only way to show love. What you have to do is to find alternate ways to let an addict know you love him. You have to find alternate ways to feel hope for yourself. You need to find ways to deal with your own fears, and you might have to let go of some secondary gains. And finally, it's responsibility without control. Can't be anything. It's like being told that we're going on vacation to Syracuse. Okay? You drive. You can't touch the steering wheel. Get us to Syracuse. It's being put in a position in which you're told that you have to do something, yet you have no power. So take care of the good name of this family. Unfortunately, your spouse has destroyed the good name of your family. He showed up at the PTA meeting shit-faced, drunk as a monkey. All right? He threw up in church. So you've got a sense that you ought to be able to control these things, and yet you have no control because you're living with an addict. And his disease is unpredictable. His disease will get him doing things that he doesn't even want to do. So, unfortunately, what that means is it's a major stressor. Because when you're given responsibility and you realize you have no control, you start to feel hopeless. Oh my God, no matter what I do, it has no effect. I have no control. Makes your anger and your fear intensify, and then it does increase the sense of frustration and hopelessness. Most families go through the following. If you recognize it, it's because you're living with addiction. The first is that they deny it. A number of people will attend these lectures for the first time wondering why they're here. And after about the third or fourth lecture, they say, oh, I'm dealing with addiction. That's what I'm dealing with. I didn't recognize it. I've successfully denied it. Okay? Denial isn't lying. All right? Denial is a failure to see the truth. And we deny for a couple of understandable reasons. Scary not to deny. We deny all kinds of things, right? We deny fear of flying in airplanes because we're trying to protect ourselves. We're trying to feel some measure of control in that situation. So denial is something very ordinary for families. I've had people say to me, after the series, I realized that I've been dealing with an addict for 25 years. And for the first 20 of those, I didn't know it. I didn't know it. And it wasn't until I heard the symptoms, etc., that I began to recognize that that's what it was. You enable. Denial, rescue, cover-up, and nagging. Those are the classic denial mechanisms. You bail them out of jail, you make excuses to the boss, you nag and badger and hassle, and you know what happens when you do that, right? They get instantly sober. No, Jesus, they go down to the bar and say, you drink too if you had a wife like mine. And the guy at the other end of the bar is going to say, yeah, I do. And then one enabler finds another one. Hey, shit, you can't be an alcoholic. If you're an alcoholic, so am I. Isn't that a silly notion? Get him a drink. Find me an addict, I'll find you at least 4 or 5 people or institutions or policies that enable him to continue in some way. And so what you want to do when you're treating addiction is you want to advise the enablers to stop doing that. Stop doing that. Find another way to feel hope rather than deny and enable. Most families have gone through some home remedies. That means that we believe that a good vacation, fun at Atlantic City or Disney World, or a trip to the mountains or the shore, almost anywhere but here, will straighten things out. All right, you're dealing with a primary disease. You can't have fun make it go away. It's a primary disease. You're dealing with a person who has a brain that responds to dopamine in such a way that he not only loves it, but every time he uses it, he loses it. So if he wants to feel good, he has to use it. Unfortunately, to use it is to lose it. It's not reabsorbed. So you start this terrible cycle. And when physical dependence enters the picture, and it doesn't have to, there are plenty of addicts who die without ever having been physically dependent. If physical dependence enters the picture, it makes it even worse. Because now when he doesn't drink, he suffers as much as when he does. Control struggles. Families battle for control. Somebody's got to have control of the finances. Somebody has to control the children. Or I know of any number of women whose job on weekends becomes to protect the children from mom or dad, doesn't matter. Protect the kids. And so they spend their weekends trying to avoid exposing the kids to an alcoholic parent. Families start to restructure. So parents, he's in love with booze. She's in love with she doesn't know what. Some kids are on dad's side because dad's funny. Some kids are on mom's side because mom is suffering. Some kid gets mad at the other kid, got it, for sidling with mom. I had a young girl tell me, I was more angry at my mother, the non-alcoholic, than my father, all right? My mother was a bitch. My mother was a harpy. And she just wouldn't leave the man alone because she kept thinking it would work. Okay, my father was a nice. Some alcoholics, are nice. Some are funny. All right, they're not all raving maniacs who go around wanting to kill people. In fact, hang around on lecture number 2 or 3. We'll show you some pictures of some alcoholics. You'll be surprised. A family is likely to experience periods of separation. So the family gets tired of the alcoholism and says, that's it, you're out. If they haven't really planned on how they're going to pull that off, more than likely an addict will talk his way back in, all right, after a little binge or two. So, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about a couple of things. What do you do with an active addict? What do you do with a recovering addict? And what do you do for yourself? So take a short break, 5 minutes or so, and we'll start back.